stand still. Before we kick off with the next session, I have a question for you. How many of you have a technical skills? Please raise your hands. I see a couple of people. Okay, so I assume the rest of you don't have technical skills, is that right? Alright, that's perfect because the next session may be particularly interesting for you. Today with us is Andrew Powell from Oak Labs, who will just talk about that, how to build a great product as a non-technical co-founder. What to do and what to not to do. Andrew.
Awesome, thank you. Nice. Okay, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to join. As we just mentioned, I'm going to be talking about what it means to build products as an early stage non-technical founder. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about how challenging this is. But it's super exciting because I really firmly believe that there's never been a better time to build a startup, to build a product as a non-technical founder. So a little bit about me, my background's in product sales and marketing. At the moment, I'm overseeing the product teams for 10 different venture-backed startups as part of Oaks Lab, which I'll talk about in a moment. I've also led the development there of our product development methodology, which is called the Oaks Lab Way, which we've designed for early stage startups. And before that, I had the founding experience of taking a startup from pre-seed, from 3 people right up to 100 people. And actually, as a non-technical founder there, the funny thing is that I made some of the mistakes that I'm now going to talk about today. So Oaks Lab, what we do at Oaks Lab is we provide product design and engineering focused exclusively on startups. So we'll partner with early stage startups, anywhere from the kind of pre-seed to Series B phase, and help them get to product market fit and scale. You can see here, we've actually got a couple of the startups that we have or currently work with in the room today. Everything from fintech to food tech, cybersecurity, social media. We've helped a bunch of non-technical founders get to product market fit and scale. So far we've worked with 35 startups. Their valuation is now just over $1.5 billion. And something we're really proud of and something we always track is how much are the startups growing in value when working with us. So on average, a startup working with us grows about 1,200% within the first couple of years of working with us. But what we're doing is really, really hard. And everyone's probably seen these stats before, and there's a reason it's called startup grind, because 90% of startups fail. What's scary is a big reason of that is because they just never build a product that people need. And 15 months is the average seed stage runway. It's pretty scary. What that means in practice is that you have limited time and resources to build an awesome product that users love and customers will pay for. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But one thing that we've seen working at Oaks Lab and working with a lot of non-technical founders is that there's some really easy pitfalls to fall into, but also some things that we've seen our founders do that has helped them to be really successful. And I won't be kind of sharing kind of empty platitudes with you guys. I want to share kind of specific examples. So I'm going to be talking about real things that have happened with some of the startups that we've worked with at Oaks Lab, things that they've done. We're not going to share the names, obviously, and some of the stories, details have been redacted, obviously to protect confidentiality. But through those examples, we're going to talk about 3 primary things. The first is starting lean and what that actually means to start lean in 2023. The second is focusing on outcomes over outputs, a really easy pitfall for non-technical founders to fall into. And the third one is giving your product time to breathe once you've done those 2 things. So I'm going to start by beginning with starting lean. And, this concept has been around for a long time now. The concept of the MVP, everyone knows about it. I think it was over 10 years ago now that the Lean Startup came out, and Eric Ries said it was a version of a new product that allows the team to gather the maximum amount of customer knowledge with the least amount of effort. And Reid Hoffman also famously said that if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've released too late. And at the same time, we've seen some really successful examples that have kind of become legend in this area of the world and in the legend of building startups. Uber's MVP, which was Uber Cab at the time, where it had a single feature in a single market, proving a single hypothesis. And Dropbox, where they didn't even release a product for the MVP, it was literally a video that he used to show traction to potential investors to get money to build out the full product. So this is really genuine, lean, true MVPs. The thing is, this is, in my experience, much easier to say than do, because it's very easy as a non-technical founder to think about the version 5, to think about the long-term vision, how you're going to change the world with this enterprise SaaS product that has 5 different components, 100 integrations, whatever it may be. It's much harder to think about what that first version is, how you test that hypothesis. And I'm going to show you a little example of someone that I recently spoke to, and he came to us and he said, Andy, we want to build a wealth management app, but I want it to be an MVP, I want it to be really lean, and we need to build it in 4 to 8 weeks. And I built the scope in that way, and this was the scope that he then provided us with. He wanted a mobile app that had Android and iOS. He wanted dashboard and analytics, notifications, white label branding, messaging functionality, an integration with bill payments, secure document exchange and storage, password sharing integrations, and then he also wanted a management dashboard with role-based access control, messaging functionality, workflow management tool, and dashboard and analytics for good measure as well. And it was accompanied by this. As you can see, the scope is very limited for the MVP. We're trying to keep things super simple so we can test the use case and get feedback. Now, actually, this is really common. It's really common. And I like to think of it as minimal or lean in name only. And it's something that we speak to founders a lot about, and it's something that we have to do is distill that vision down into what is that first version that we can actually build and test on the market. But maybe for people in the room, what is actually the challenge? What is the problem with building this version that's on the left-hand side? Any ideas? If anyone wants to put up their hand. It's not an MVP, yeah. But why? Yeah, it's really complex.
It's not user-friendly.
Yeah, it's
too much going on.
There's a lot going on. We don't know if it's user-friendly. That's the thing, right? We don't know if users want any of these things. Now, he'd spoken to a couple of customers. He told us that. But it was from one company that he'd worked with. And we weren't sure if users wanted all of these things. Also, engineers are super expensive. I think everyone knows that by now. This was a custom-coded solution. It would cost a lot of money to get this out. He'd raised, I think, about $150,000 to get this idea out. He was going to have to spend all of this to probably get a small percentage of what he wanted to build. And finally, and potentially worst of all, it's going to take months to validate. That's going to take months to build, not a case of weeks. So if it is the case that in 6 months, users don't want it, he's out of money, out of time, and that's not a good place to be in. As an entrepreneur, non-technical, you want to give yourself as many at-bats as possible to get it right. And I'll frame this against an example from one of our other founders, who I think did this actually really well. And they came to us with an idea for, it was a HR tech startup, and they were working on the future of work. And as you can see, this was their MVP that they actually already came to us with on the right. Is it the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? No, it's pretty ugly in a way. It doesn't look the best. But what they did is they raised a small seed round, actually similar, $150,000. They built that MVP in Bubble, which, as most people in this room probably know, if you don't, it's like a no-code platform, drag-and-drop functionality to build an app. It allows you to iterate really quickly. And they built it with the customers. So they were there spending time iterating regularly on this Bubble MVP. And it cost them about 1/10 of what their entire seed round was. So about $10,000, $15,000. So they've now got a lot of money to spend on potentially the next solution. And they even managed to close the first few deals with that Bubble MVP to validate the business model before they built out the full scalable solution. So some key takeaways here for starting lean. Just try to identify the specific idea you're trying to validate. Don't try and do everything at once. Secondly, make sure you speak to customers and speak to customers properly. Really deeply understand their users. In my experience, some founders who are non-technical, who haven't yet worked in a product environment, might not ask the best questions to truly understand what their users need, and might ask questions that are framed in a way to get the answer that they want to hear. And finally, research and leverage tools to bootstrap your proof of concept or MVP. It's 2023. There are so many tools out there now that as a non-technical founder, you can actually build something yourself. Tools like Webflow. You can build great front-end interfaces on Webflow in 2023, and if you connect it with tools like Zapier, there's suddenly a lot of functionality you can do by linking existing apps together. I actually recently met a startup that was finalizing a Series A for $10 million, and about 90% of their tech stack was built on Airtable, with a few front-end custom components that they'd outsourced. So their cost of development was incredibly low because they'd use Airtable for such a large percentage of their tech stack. Bubble is obviously a great tool, as you saw just then, for drag and drop, no code. It does take a while to learn, but it's super cheap and you can iterate really fast. There's this thing called like ChatGPT that came out recently, if anyone's heard of it. But in all seriousness, with GPT-4, the ability to code is pretty insane. And if you combine that with a tool like Replit, which provides you with an integrated dev environment online, so you don't have to set up a development environment on your laptop, suddenly, if you go on Twitter and search this, you're seeing non-technical people build Chrome extensions, build simple applications, having never coded before, just following instructions. So the opportunities for low code, for no code, and even for text to code in 2023 are pretty insane. And that doesn't mean that by the time you get to a Series A, Series B, you're going to be using these tools. It's a great opportunity to validate the first idea. Okay, the first is about staying lean. Second is focusing on outcomes over outputs. Now, whenever I start working with a founder, one of the first things I want to do is start talking scope, start talking about what features they want in that first version of the product. But I want to ask them, what is your long-term vision for the business? And usually founders are pretty good at explaining this. They'll know what they want to achieve in 5 years' time. They'll usually have a pretty good idea as well of what they want to achieve in the next year, whether that's getting to a certain level of funding, getting to a certain amount of revenue, user acquisition, user retention, whatever it is. And then when it comes to the next 3 months, they might not be as sure. But what scares me is, I speak to a lot of founders, and the first thing that they will tell us is very output focused. They want to release a product. That's the goal. I want to release a product. And I want to just tell a couple of stories of 2 different startups and how the power of the goals that you're aiming towards have a huge impact on the eventual outcomes of your product. So the first startup I'm going to mention, they're actually a Series B fintech startup, pretty large company that came to us, and they were looking to rebuild some legacy technology they had as they kind of relaunched their brand in a pretty big market. They said, hey, guys, we want to release a new version of the product in a modern technology stack by November. And I want it to look like Coinbase. That was what we got. That was the goal. And despite asking for other goals, despite asking for other things, it came back to this. Guys, we've just got to release it. Just copy the existing technology and make it look like Coinbase and we'll be good to go. What do you think was the challenge with that approach? Any ideas, guys?
Plagiarism.
Plagiarism, we've heard.
Coinbase took forever to get.
Yeah, so there was a couple of challenges, and actually the project didn't get off to the best start because of what we were aiming towards. Because we were focused on hitting this artificial deadline rather than delivering value to the end users. What we discovered, having designed some of the flows and tested them with users, is that actually there were some real problems with the legacy technology, with the design patterns, with the flows, that didn't give the users the best experience. So we were running down a hill, at the end of which was not a good result. Secondly, nobody knew if the users wanted or needed it to look like Coinbase, and guess what? Turns out they absolutely didn't need it to look like Coinbase. And what was the challenge here is that we spent a lot of time focusing on the UI, focusing on the color scheme, how the graphs looked in this application, when we hadn't got the first thing right, which was the basic design patterns, the UX flows. And also, the team was measuring their success based on outputs, based on how many screens can we deliver per sprint, how many story points can we deliver. That's obviously a great metric to track, but there was no end goal. There was no how much revenue is this going to bring the company, how much increase in user retention is this going to bring the company. There was nothing around that. So we had to change the approach slightly. And I want to use that and compare it against another startup that we've worked with. Actually, again, a Series B fintech startup. They're streamlining the workflow of public listings without going into too much detail. And they have one key goal. One key goal. We want to cut the listing time to X months through our platform. That's all we want to do. And we had milestones for each release to see how much we were able to drop the listing time. That goal was used to prioritize new features. Prioritization as a non-technical founder is one of the most challenging things. If you have a good goal that you're achieving towards, it makes prioritization infinitely easier. Because you're not having an argument over whether or not we should build this feature. You have an objective stick to measure against, which is, in this case, how much will this feature help us to cut the listing time? And I trust me, when you narrow your goals down, you're going to be able to just throw a lot of things away that aren't going to help you achieve them. And also, the entire product team was empowered towards achieving this goal. We were able to give them the responsibility to focus on what they wanted to, as long as they were all moving towards this. So some key takeaways here. Make sure your team has good, smart goals. Tie them to fundraising milestones, tie them to revenue, tie them to key business metrics that's going to help you to grow. With non-technical founders, it can be really dangerous that product suddenly becomes built in a silo, particularly if you're working with a vendor. If you're working with an outsourced agency or maybe contracted engineers, it can be really dangerous when that team is not empowered by business results, because suddenly everything is on you to make sure the product strategy goes right. If you don't have loads of experience there, it can be a challenge. So use your team, give them the right goals, empower them. Secondly, limit your initiatives. One of my favorite quotes is that the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Stay super, super focused. I firmly believe that most of the startups that we've worked with probably could have taken half of their initiatives, thrown them away, and that probably would have been better for them. And finally, focus on the function rather than the form of things. Particularly when it comes to design, it can be really tempting to get bogged down in how things look, what color scheme you're using, the UI, at the expense of focusing on the function. And the danger here is you need to keep whoever is working on your product focus on this as well. Because believe it or not, engineers love to code and designers love to design. So sometimes they aren't going to be as empowered by the business goals. So if you give them clear focus, it's going to stop them maybe sometimes going a little rogue and spending a lot of time building that certain page. So outcomes over outputs. The third point I want to talk about is giving your product time to breathe. And I'm going to use the example here of kind of very simple P&L that we might typically see from one of our startups. It's maybe exaggerated slightly, but it's very simplified. But as an early stage founder, or even as a growth stage founder, you know what investors want to see. They want to see growth as quickly as possible. But that can be a little dangerous, particularly at the early stage. This is the kind of P&L we might see for an early stage founder that comes to us. So we've got revenue, sales, expenses, and the product team. So in January, they're really focused on building, the first version of their product, same in February. And then, after February, the plan is that the MVP is released and I'm going to hire 2 salespeople because the product's going to be released and now I can go sell it. Great. And at that point, you predict that revenue goes to $5,000 in month 1. And I'm also going to scale down the product team at this point because, the product's done now, it's ready. And then in April, we're obviously going to double revenue now. We're going to double month on month. That's how startups work, right? Once you release the product, more people buy it. So we're going to double revenue every month until June. And keep the product team low. And sales expenses, we're going to have 2 people. What do you think is the challenge with a forecast like this, guys? Any ideas?
You might not sell. It's assuming a lot.
It's assuming a lot. It's not realistic. Exactly. So there's some real key points here. The first is that this is putting heavy financial and psychological pressure on that first version of the product to be really successful. Chances are, if it's a proper MVP, people aren't going to be paying $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 for it after 4 months of its release. The second thing is that you're giving yourself absolutely no room to pivot or change strategy. Because you're saying, this is my product now, I'm scaling down the product team, I need to be raking revenue, and you're giving yourself no room to be able to flip or change strategy. And the final thing is that you're adding sales roles before you maybe even know you've got a product that people actually want to buy. And as someone who's run sales teams, this can be really horrible for the salesperson. They come in, they have to sell this new startup's product that it turns out no one wants yet. Compare that to a lesson from one of our founders. So they're a Series B B2B SaaS startup now, but we worked with them right from when it was a one-person team. And the founder iterated the product with just a few customers before they eventually released at scale. They focused on a super specific niche, so they decided, hey, I'm not going to try and sell this to SMEs, mid-market, and enterprise. I'm going to target one specific niche. And they closed 6 large enterprise deals themselves before they invested significant money in sales and marketing. So they gave themselves time. And this is super important, to avoid hiring heavily until you start to gain early signs of that product market fit. And there could be a whole topic on what product market fit is, I'm sure. I won't get into it too much now. But build your P&L and forecasting in a way that does give your product time to fail. Now, this is a line that you have to toe, you have to balance, because you obviously want healthy pressure on you to be successful. And finally, find your niche and double down. Don't try and be everything to everyone, because on both the product side and on the sales side, it's going to be super challenging, especially with a small team, to sell to SMEs, to sell to big markets, to sell to enterprise. Those people all need a different sales process, and they all need different product features. So just to summarize, guys, starting lean, if I could say one thing, just think about when I'm releasing my next feature, my next component, my first product, how can I keep it as lean as possible? What tools can I use that don't require me spending a lot of money on engineers and a lot of time? How can I set really clear goals for my product team so that they are motivated by the business outcome that they're going to deliver rather than just, hey, I released a product? And finally, how can I make my forecast something that's going to give myself the time to be able to fail healthily? But I truly believe, guys, there's never been a better time to build a company as a non-technical founder, as I said at the start. Thanks a lot for coming, really appreciate it. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Check out oakslab.com, and I'll be around if anyone wants to chat afterwards.
And I think, maybe if you don't mind, we have time for one question.
Yeah.
We're going to take one, okay? We got the question right here. I'm going to give you the microphone so everyone can hear, okay? And maybe introduce yourself too.
I can skip the introduction, really? Okay. Thanks for the time. I'm going to skip the introduction, but I very much agree with the stay lean and MVP pieces that you brought up, but I'm curious if you have any insights onto other products like dev tools, which you're basically asking a customer to change their entire house plumbing to take on your product. How do you stay lean when it's something that's more comprehensive as an offering? if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the first thing is I think staying lean doesn't mean just building products, small or big. Staying lean can be making sure that you are absolutely certain you know what these customers need before you go and build the big product. So that could mean building out prototypes, really going in and testing it with the customers that you think want it. Because yeah, it's not just about starting small with the product, but staying lean also means testing, speaking to a lot of customers before you actually commit to building something. So I would say, yeah, I totally agree. There are some products where it can be difficult to start with a single feature, but you can at least start with a lot of testing, validation, customer interviews.
Thank you very much. And that's all the time we have right now. So big round of applause for Andrew Oaks Lab. Thank you very much. Now,